Hi there, welcome to the Digital JST Show, your go to podcast for digital marketing insights that drive business growth and career success. I am JST Anandan, your host, and this podcast is brought to you by Digital JST. That's my digital marketing consultancy helping businesses worldwide. You can check it out at digitaljst.com. Whether you are a B2B business looking to expand your online presence or a professional in a full time job or freelancing, this podcast is designed to help you learn from top marketing experts and make smarter, more strategic decisions. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for updates. If you are listening on any podcast app, follow the Digital JSD show, and if you like the show, leave a rating. Alright, let's jump right in. Today we have with us Ron Yap, a dedicated mental health advocate, writer, and therapist, and the creator behind the Instagram page Mental Health CEO, where he raises awareness around mental health for a community of over 360K people. In today's episode, we are going to talk about how mental health conversations at work have evolved and the most common struggles people face today, from burnout in fast paced environments like startup agencies and corporate jobs. So, whether you are a business owner, team leader, consultant, or someone trying to protect their own well being while building their career, this episode is definitely for you. Ron, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Let's get started. So, you have built a community of over 360K people around mental health. What first drew you to this space? Was it a personal experience or turning point that made you want to focus on mental health coaching?
Totally. So basically, I created my page, Mental Health CEO, right? And that's a page that's dedicated to raising awareness of mental health and destigmatizing mental health conditions, both in our personal lives and also in the workplace as well. So what drew me to this space was essentially my own personal story. So it actually turned out that I had a mental health condition, which was OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder, for many, many years. In fact, I would say more than a decade, but I didn't even realize that it was OCD until many years later when I saw a post about my specific form of OCD on my Instagram Explore page. So that was what actually got me into therapy, getting diagnosed for my condition, and eventually also becoming a psychotherapist and counselor, which I am today. And that was also what made me create my page in the first place, because I knew that there were a lot of people who were kind of in the similar situation as me, believing that their issues were not worthy of attention and help. But the truth is they were suffering from a mental health condition. And just realizing that helped me to get a lot of relief and peace within myself. So that was what drew me to create the page in the first place.
It's good to know that at least you figured out that you had OCD and you came to know about it through Instagram Explore page. But have you seen anyone who sees such symptoms but they still ignore to address it?
Oh, yeah. It's sometimes not just ignorance, but also the denial because of the fact that there's still a lot of stigma around mental health, especially in our society, the Asian society, where there's still a bit of a taboo or stigma against discussing mental health. So the
Right.
conversation has improved over the years, but there's still that bit of stigma. And sometimes there's this label, especially in the workplace, or this fear that, let's say, if I have a disorder or if I have a mental health condition, that I will be unfairly treated. There's prejudice and stigma against me. Even, let's say, the interviewing process, or maybe if my colleagues or bosses knew that I had a condition, then they would treat me differently. And that's why sometimes people, they're either afraid to get diagnosed or they're afraid to even discuss the potential that they have a mental health condition or with their friends or colleagues.
Mhm. Over the years, how have you seen conversations around mental health at work evolve, especially in fast paced environments like startups, agencies, or corporate jobs?
Totally. So I think from the history of like corporate work, there's this idea that you are your job. And so from the early years of that whole conversation, it was work, 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 work. And that the more you can work, the better you are as an employee and the better you are as a person also. And then in recent times, especially in the 21st century, the conversation has shifted in the other direction, where there's more talk about work-life balance, especially in multinational like corporations and agencies as well. And that whole conversation was helpful to give this idea that you are more than your job. But then in recent years, there has been also a shift, I feel, to the other direction as well, where again, there's this talk about work being who you are as your person, and your worth is kind of defined by how much you can work. And in essence, that becomes your identity. So if you ask me, the conversation has shifted really here and there. And now it seems like we're going in that other direction where there is a correction to the correction, where it's saying, oh, perhaps we've gone too far in the direction. And now let's go back a bit, especially after the COVID period, where now there's a lot of talk about going back to the office. And along with that, that shift towards a more work-based identity. So that's what I've been seeing both in the conversation and also with my clients as well.
Okay, good. Okay, so in your experience, what are the most common mental health challenges people face at work today? Burnout, comparison, overwork, or something else?
Right, right. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Burnout and overwork are probably one of the higher tier like issues that I see constantly. And I kind of put them in the same category because when you overwork, you're burnout. And when you're burnout, you overwork essentially. And the reason for that is like I said, there's this idea or there's this culture both in the organizations themselves and also internalized within the employee that I am my job. And that let's say if something bad happens at my job or if I have a mistake or I don't work hard enough, essentially there's a problem with me and that I'm a lazy and ill-disciplined person. And that's why there's a lot of talk about the burnout and overwork. And sometimes the lead up to burnout can be really subtle, but then there comes a point where the entire dam breaks, where I've heard of stories where even from some of the people that I've talked to, where essentially they could not even wake up from the bed in the morning, even though they know that, let's say they have a meeting in 1 hour, 2 hours, they physically cannot wake up from bed because they are burnout. And that's because their body essentially gave way and they kind of ignored the messages that their body and their mind was telling them until it hit this breaking point for them for burnout and overwork. So comparison is also another issue. And the root of that is essentially this thing where we apply relationships between different things to what we're currently facing in life. Essentially this idea where, let's say a 50-cent coin, for example, has more value than a 10-cent coin. And so there's this mental model in our mind that thing with a certain higher value, numerical value, is worth more than a thing with a lower numerical value. And so we compare ourselves to people with higher salary, with a higher rank or higher status. And in today's social media game, people with more followers or more likes and engagement. And then we think to ourselves, hey, this person has more value than me, right? And that's where that culture of comparison comes from. And it's something that's automatic, right? If you don't catch it, if you're not aware of it, it can be very subtle in affecting your state of mind. And then the other issue that I see very commonly is actually inter-team conflict or conflict between seniors, the bosses, and also the employees. Because something that happens a lot that's not discussed is this idea of powerlessness or helplessness when somebody else, let's say it's your boss or it's your colleague who has a better performance than you, and yet you have a certain conflict with them and you feel that voicelessness or you feel that powerlessness because in essence, it's all connected because it feels that you have a lower value than them because they have a higher rank or they have a higher worth than you in the company. And because of that, you don't feel like you can do anything about it. So that's another common issue at work as well.
If you had to design a mentally healthy workplace, what are the two, three non-negotiables you would include both in culture and in systems?
Right. So the first thing really is this idea of being heard. Because like what I said, that feeling of voice, of not having a voice, right? That's actually something that leads to a really declining mental health in the workplace. So the first step is to create a culture where even employees, no matter where they are on the corporate ladder, they can be heard and they know that their feedback is taken seriously, right? Even if, let's say, their issue is with their bosses or it's with their workload, sometimes I've heard of cases where the HR or whichever policy department, they say, oh, feel free to talk to us. But whenever they make a report, it's not really taken seriously. So the first step is to create that culture of, let's say, if you have issues with your workload or your burnout, or you have, let's say, inter-team conflict, we are there for you and we are actually willing to hear you out seriously and take issue on that. So that's the first thing. The second non-negotiable is this idea of sense of belonging, right? And this idea that even though we are a team of different unique people, you still have a place in our organization, even if we know that it's kind of this workplace environment. Not so much to the extent that I would say, oh, like we're like a family or that, because in the end, it's still a workplace. But this idea that we appreciate who you are as a person beyond just the work that you can do, right? Your unique interests, your unique hobbies, and your unique strengths. And that ability to recognize people for who they are beyond their work, that's something that I would also categorize as a non-negotiable. Because going back to the root of everything, I just feel like people want to be treated like people more so than tools, more so than instruments who can be measured at a specific KPI. They want to be more than that, right? And the ability to appreciate and recognize that, that's very important for a workplace.
All right. So for companies and business owners listening, what are some early signs that their team's mental well-being might be declining, and what can they do about it before burnout happens?
Right. So the first step really is because things, there are small signs first before things happen all at once, like that, like what I was talking about, the issue where the person could not even wake up physically from bed. You have to be more careful about these signs before it progresses to that point of the breaking point. So the first step really that I see is this idea where the of self-isolation essentially, where the communication gets more and more fragmented. And this, let's say they used to take a certain amount of time to reply, and now they take much longer than that. And sometimes even days or weeks before they get back to normal communication. So this idea of radio silence is very common amongst employees with a declining mental health. So that's something to be aware of. And the second thing is this idea where the tasks that they could do like easily or perform easily, these tasks become more and more difficult because of their poor mental health. And essentially, this means that there's this idea of cognitive like dysfunction, that something else is on their mind that's overpowering their ability to focus and concentrate on this one task. So these are the two small signs that I would say the employers have to be really careful of and detect that. And as for what to do about it, the first step I feel is to be willing to have that conversation about, hey, I noticed that you are doing this, and this, and you're not like your usual self. Is there something wrong that's going on? Or perhaps is your workload too much? Do you need some adjustments? And just the willingness to have that conversation can feel like a breath of fresh air to an employee who feels like they have their back against the wall. And it goes back to what I said just now about feeling heard, feeling appreciated.
Okay, I understand like companies or businesses can go and talk to people if they see such early signs. But how about people who don't still open up even when they're questioned about such things? So how these companies can create awareness about mental health that people can come to them, trust them that they can be heard and then they can address their problem.
Right. That's a very good question, right? Because sometimes businesses, right, they go in the opposite direction, like too much, where they're like, oh, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what is, what's bothering you. And perhaps it's a very personal thing, a personal issue that they are not willing to share with their employer, right? And in that sense, it's an idea of respect of boundaries. And yet we still know that there are simple things that the employer can do for the employees, right? So I don't know if you've heard of the concept of love language. So essentially, there's the concept of love language can be applied. It's not essentially like a romantic thing, right? Because there's different relationships, but still recognizing, let's say a person has a gifts or words of affirmation as a love language, and being able to give that while still respecting the boundary of, let's say, if you don't want to tell me, let's say it's a family issue and they don't want to share that, is to respect the boundary as well. And yet, let's say, for example, they like gifts, right? And then one day they come to office and then they see that they have their favorite little like toy, or perhaps let's say they like a Labubu's, and that's a recent trend. And essentially they receive that on their table. It's a sign of appreciation that goes beyond words, right? That goes beyond forcing employees to tell the employer about their whole situation. But the one exception to this, I must disclaim, is a love language of touch. So obviously that requires consent and boundaries as well. So yeah, that's a conversation to be had. But being aware, again, it goes back to this idea that employees are more than instruments, they're more than tools. They're their own unique person. And to recognize that interest and their hobby or their strength and playing to that, that leads to what we call self-actualization. of the employee. Essentially, we want the workplace to be a place where the employee feels comfortable and safe to express who they are as a person, right? Beyond their work. And sometimes it's not a mutually exclusive thing where you are a worker or you are like a person. Essentially, we want the workplace to be a place where they can become their own person while providing value for the company as well. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Really. A lot of people starting their careers, especially consultants or freelancers, tend to overwork to prove themselves or gain experience. How can they set boundaries without feeling guilty or afraid of losing opportunity?
Mm-mm-mm. And so this is a very common issue both with freelancers and also entrepreneurs as well. This idea that the more I give to myself now, the more I will be benefited in the short term. And this is a quite a dangerous idea because as it leads to overwork and burnout, as you mentioned. So my advice is number one, to have this mental reminder almost every single day that you are not your job. Okay. And some of the thoughts associated with that story, essentially, this idea that if I don't do well in my job, it's a problem with me, and that basically I have certain issues. It's a personality thing. And so the thoughts along that line is something like, I have to prove myself, right? I have to overwork. And if I don't do well, if I don't give everybody exactly what they need, there's a problem with me. And so the first step is to recognize that you're having these thoughts in the first place and you're having this story. And just this reminder that you essentially are a person, more than your job, more than any other certain thing. And to play to that, the second practical thing that I would recommend is to have, like what we say, there's multiple sources of income, right? What about multiple sources of meaning, multiple sources of happiness, right? To build things that are not just in your profession, in your professional life, but also things outside of your professional life, be it your hobbies or your interests. And these are things that build out who you are as a person beyond your professional career. Yep.
All right. So, what daily or weekly practices do you recommend for people who are constantly on and finding it hard to switch off from work mentally?
Mm-mm-mm. And so this is where the whole conversation around mindfulness, it becomes quite important. And mindfulness essentially is this idea of separation, right? Just because you have this thought that, oh, I have to be working all the time. And in fact, that whole idea of like, if I don't be useful to people, I'm not worthy. I would say that even has roots in inner child wounds and past wounds. The first step is really to be aware of them in the first place, that they are this invisible narrative that's constantly affecting you in your day-to-day life. It's almost like a broken recorder, right? And that's where mindfulness comes in, because being able to be mindful allows you to know that this story or these thoughts are occurring and yet have a sense of distance with them in the first place. So a lot of people think of mindfulness as meditation and yoga, and those are very potent sources of that can improve your mindfulness. But even then, it's being able to incorporate it into your day-to-day actions. Because let's say simply putting yourself in the present, such as when you are, let's say, taking a shower, and being able to ground yourself in that present moment awareness practice, such as being able to feel all of the physical sensations, even in, let's say, when you're eating something, being able to set a challenge for yourself to maybe detect some of the tastes or fully enjoy the experience of eating something. Maybe even detect, let's say, some of the ingredients that's within the food. That's also a present moment or mindfulness exercise as well, that I would say is more doable than setting a goal of like 1 or 2 hours of meditation like a day. That's something that not a lot of people, especially people working in fast-paced corporate jobs, can do.
Right. Okay, so when people come to you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or burnout, what's your approach to helping them heal and rebuild balance?
Hmm. So the first step really is when people let's say if they come to me feeling burnt out, right? Essentially, there's this idea that they have merged with their job, right? In essence, they are their job. And so the first step that I do is to create this vision of your ideal life, where yes, your professional career is still a part of it, but again, there's more parts of you than that, right? So sometimes there's this thing called the miracle question in counseling and psychotherapy, where the miracle question is, let's say if tomorrow you woke up and your entire life changed for the better. So what does that life look like? And let's say, more importantly, the question is, or let's say we created a life where all of that ideal feelings happen every day. And then the more important question is, who is the you that is living that life, right? Who is the you that's currently enjoying that ideal life? Is it you that is more relaxed? Is it the you that's more at peace? Or you that has achieved that? And so then the next question afterwards is something that's more practical, right? We can't change to be that person overnight, but we can change the direction of our life. And the question that I ask is, what is one small thing that we can do to move in the direction of that ideal life to become the ideal you, right? To make your life at least 1% better. Yep, that's my approach.
Okay, so basically they have to ask themselves certain questions to reflect upon and work on themselves. So if you could give one message to both employers and employees about mental health at work, what would it be?
Got it. So the one message that I would, in line, I think, with everything that we just said, which is that I always believe that the goal of any coaching or even any counseling is to help people rediscover who they are as unique human beings, right? In essence, the core of the message is treat people like people. Right? People just want to be treated like people. And in essence, more than a tool, more than an instrument. So for employers, I would say the people that you're dealing with, they are people, right? They cannot be measured in terms of KPI or like the amount of numerical value that they can provide to your organization. They are unique people, right? And appreciating that allows you to synergize the growth of the employee with the goals of the company and the business outcomes. And for employees, I would say to them, you are more than your job. You are your own unique person, right? With your own unique strengths, hobbies, and interests. And to be able to create and envision a life where you're living all of those interests every single day, that is the ideal and desired life that you can lead. That is not just your job.
All right. And one more question, last one, coming from my personal experience, because I have gone myself to some of the mental health awareness sessions just to explore like how it is, because I have never gone for it. So I came across one person who asked like, why you are here. This is, I'm sure there are many people out there who would have explored like me and been questioned like this. So the person asked me, how, why are you here? Do you need any help or something? So I said, no, I just came here just to be aware of how that mental health issues are, and just in case I need some awareness and want to help other people if they need some help. That's the
Mm.
reason I'm here. And there was another experience where I heard from a girl saying there are people who judge you. You also mentioned about it. Like people judge you when you tell them that you are taking some sessions or something. Though I was just there to explore, but there are people who are coming there and taking some therapist sessions, and so they are being judged. So they feel being judged, and that's why they are not opening up. So, what is your take? How people should consider that they should not be judged, or they should not be afraid to be judged by people? Let people think whatever they want to think, but we can still take care of ourselves and also help others.
Right. Like, so your question is like basically how do we deal with that judgment essentially,
Yes.
right? And it's very funny because this whole idea of judgment, right? I think it's not so much when other people judge us, but it's when other people's judgment becomes our own judgment towards ourselves, right?
Correct.
We have our own worst critic. And let's say if the thing is like let's say if it was some other person who we kind of like, because this whole idea of judgment, right, it becomes more concrete when it becomes a part of our own internal narrative, right? So the first step is, like I tell people, the first step is, let's say when people judge you, the question is, why are you treating that so seriously, right?
Mm.
And times it is because someone in their past who is important to them said the same thing to them, and
Mm.
now the thoughts are connecting in a way. Right? Perhaps it was their caretaker, it was their parent, or a teacher when they were younger who said the same things to them. And now it's affecting in the same way. The same neurons are activating, right? The first step
Mm.
is to be aware that this connection is probably happening. And the second thing really is, apart from that judgment, right? The internal narrative, can we change that narrative to be something a bit more helpful and constructive, right? And in essence, it's embodying that I like to call it the inner champion. Just now we talked about that ideal self, right? The you that's living your how would they respond to the judgment? Yeah, how would they respond in a way that is constructive and helpful? Sometimes they will even brush it off, or sometimes they will say, "Hey, this person's judgment is was quite mean spirited or rude, but yet there's a kernel of truth in that I'm going to take, and I'm going to discard the rest of that judgment, essentially." And then what I always tell people is that there's still this stigma and there's still this taboo around discussing mental health, even saying that you're going for therapy, and yet you're still here seeking help. Is that not a sign of strength, right?
Hmm.
That you recognize that being strong doesn't mean being able to deal with all the challenges by yourself, but that also recognizing that when you need help beyond suffering by yourself. And in that sense, you are strong for being able to accept their judgment or know that you'll be judged for it and yet still come for therapy or counseling anyway, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a very important thing to tap on their strength. Because vulnerability, like we always say, courage is not the absence of fear, but it's having the fear and doing it anyway. Strength, in that similar nature, strength is knowing that sometimes you will need help and sometimes you're vulnerable and seeking help anyway. And I think that is a very important strength to tap on.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing such honest, practical insights on mental health at work and in personal life. Your perspective on burnout, boundaries, and building healthier workplaces is going to help a lot of people who are listening. Thanks again for being here and to everyone tuning here. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much, Ram. This podcast is brought to you by Digital JST. If you want more tips, strategies, and interviews with top marketing experts from around the world, make sure to subscribe, follow the Digital JST show. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.